All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and author of Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Sign up for the podcast feed at scotthorton.org or scotthortonshow.com. I've got more than 6,000 interviews in the archive for you there going back to 2003. And follow me on all the video sites and X at Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Matt Wolfson. He is an investigative journalist and a writer for a lot of places, including the Libertarian Institute, and he's got a new one that he wrote for us in the last week here. Who's funding the attacks on Thomas Massie, and what networks are backing them? Welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing really well, and you're one of the main places I write for. The Libertarian Institute is incredible, and thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, what the hell. Great to have you on the site and on the show here. And everybody, you can follow Matt on Twitter. He's XLeft with 2 underscores.
Actually, I'm not. I'm Oppo_research.
Oh, okay.
At Oppo_research, which is also my website, oppo-research.com.
Nice. Well, you got to make sure and get the URL with the 2 dashes too and the underscores and then have them forward. Got to keep it consistent. All right. That's great. And I think XLeft was apt at some point there, huh? You just decided Oppo Research is better now?
Well, basically what I figured out is that the leftists, and I think our world, are often more against military corporatism than some of the people who called themselves Republicans. And so I was no longer willing to have a handle that sort of looked like I was even obliquely, shitting on people who we may disagree with about some things, but agree with about other things.
Sure. No, that's
so cool. I thought, enough.
Yeah. Okay, so, but now you do have an interesting story. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. I was for many years, I guess in a loose way, a Zionist, a member of the, I guess, neoliberal establishment. I mean, somebody who leaned a little more populist. I was from the Midwest, but, the beginning of my career, I did literary criticism in New York. Then I worked in the circles of prominent Zionists. The recent book from 2023, which I'd urge everybody to read, Martin Peretz's The Controversialist, which is a memoir of Peretz, one of the Israeli embassy in Washington excuse me?
He was the editor of the New Republic, right?
He was from 1974 to 2012 and the owner of it and part of the first generation of Zionists, people I actually write about in this piece, who really changed the equation when it came to Zionist dominance in Washington, D.C. and in New York and elsewhere. The Israeli embassy in D.C. has called him one of the top 70 most important people. They gave him an award for this, along with 69 other people who strengthened the Zionist-American relationship since 1948. I collaborated with him on his memoir for a number of years, and it was sort of a weird transition process. When I started, I was a believer, and by the time I ended, I wasn't. I would urge everyone to read the memoir because of the information. The most gratifying thing to me was many of his longtime critics loved the memoir because they said it showed how these networks work. And I really do think there's something to that. One thing I think is insufficiently appreciated is the way that Zionism, just as earlier networks, WASP Protestants who were for, big government and corporatism in the 1910s and 1890s, Zionism subsists on a fairly small network of powerful players. This is not, and I have a stake in this as someone who's Jewish, this is not Jewish. This is not your average American Jew. This is, 250 people, families, whatever, tied very closely to the military, corporate, technological next side of power in this country.
So I was about to ask you, actually, because I always say, we're talking about, 100 people, but you'd say 250. I would take your estimate as much more, you're seriously, you're obviously much closer. So you would say it's about 250 people.
The neocons?
250 people or families. I mean, you have the finance, you have the journalism, you have the politicos.
Yeah.
You have
So you're not just talking about the neoconservatives. You're talking about the leaders of the Zionist networks, whether they were ever ex-Trouts or not. And it sounds like you're not really ex-left. You're ex-left, right? It's Marty Peretz and his buddies who are the ex-leftists, and you were with the neocons, and now you've become more libertarian or more conservative or more something since then, is what you're saying, I think, right?
I think what I've become, I mean, honestly, I think I chronicled the empire from the point of view of imperialists. And now I'm anti-imperialist. I mean, really, like, if you're I don't want to rub people the wrong way. I have a variety of policy views. I believe in decentralized government. I mean, I love Thomas Massie, right? But that's one of the reasons I like writing the piece. But if you're a communist, if you're a socialist, if you're a libertarian, if you're Tucker Carlson, if you're against empire, I'm your friend. Because I think that on a pragmatic level, military corporatism at this point is such a disease, and it is by far the most powerful change agent we face, and the worst, and it has been since 1945. And so to me, no matter what solution you want, anybody right now we can fight about the solutions after. Right now, there's a plague here, and the plague is it's across religion. I mean, Zionism isn't a religion. It's across party. It's imperial war abroad and government-backed corporatism at home.
Right.
So that's, I would say I was with the empire and now I'm anti-empire. That's more or less how I describe myself at this point.
Yeah. Importantly, though, right? Like, unless you're talking about worms or silly pipeline dreams in Iraq or something like that, the pipeline to Haifa and all that. For the most part, when you're talking about these networks, which you had such a front row seat to witness how they all work, this network between the Zionists and the military industrial complex, it's really not Houston, right? This is not kind of overall American energy interests. This is really the Israelis exercising this undue influence to bend the American empire to serve their will, even at the expense of the empire, much less the country, right?
I think that's an extremely apt summation. I hate the empire to begin with. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the WASPs who started this thing, the Dulles brothers, etc. But I think within that framework, you're absolutely right that and I'm writing something right now where I wrote this, that if you were to apply the situation right now with mainly the Israelis, but also the Saudis and the Emiratis to like the Roman Empire in 50 CE, it would look insane. It would look like this giant empire was expending a bunch of resources to protect these territories of people, some of whom were citizens, some of whom were not, who were buying up a bunch of land in the middle of Italy and getting close to the governing councils. And you'd be like, what are these people doing? Like, simply pragmatically, what are they doing? And that is what, I've been lucky to write for the Libertarian Institute since February. And that has been the focus of my pieces, how the Israelis and Zionists in America are facilitating Israeli, Saudi, Emirati investments here, and sort of bringing us into more commitments abroad. I mean, Trump may say this is America first. It's not. It's using the Saudis, Emiratis, and Israelis as our proxies to colonize the Middle East through trade deals underwritten by American empire. I mean, that's going to continue to involve us in this region. Anybody who wants America to go back more to representative government, anybody who wants out of there, anybody who doesn't want to read about bombing, every year, that's not going to happen under this current dispensation. It just won't. So I think your notion of twisting of these very small number of countries using lobbying operations, which have been there since the 80s, by the way. I mean, I was watching a movie nobody remembers, Sidney Lumet's Power from 1986. It was one of Denzel Washington's really early roles. He was in his 30s. He played the fixer for a Saudi or Emirati sheik trying to get involved in American elections. And as I watched this, I thought, oh my gosh. This is
I know that guy.
So, I think your description is absolutely right. And I think the co-option is just stunning by small numbers of people.
Yeah. Well, it's a hell of a lot of money. I mean, the feature picture on your article here at the Institute is of Paul Singer. So I'm really glad that we went ahead and started with your background in that and your relationship with Martin Peretz and sort of your proximity to all these guys, because when I read all your great articles, I have the answer to what would be the normal rhetorical question, which is, wow, how does this guy know all this stuff? He's got a really great insight into who these people are and what the hell is going on here. So I find your articles very valuable. So let's focus on the subject at hand here. Thomas Massie done stepped out of line and the Israel lobby's mad. And so what are they doing? And by they, I mean name names, because you got them all here. Who are they and what are they doing to try to thwart Thomas Massie, which I might note from the outset here is a ridiculous fool's errand and ain't never gonna work, because he was never AstroTurf. He is probably, at least tied or, right there among the most actual grassroots, bottom up, chosen by his neighbors type representative that we have in the U.S. House. If you know his origin story, he was like filibustering at the town council or whatever, and everybody, all his neighbors said, yeah, I cede my time to him. Let him finish, because he was just so dang good at making their case against what the government was trying to do to them. And that was how he moved up very quickly in local politics to then become the local U.S. House member. So they're not going to, you know what I mean? It's like, he's not exactly Ron Paul where he delivered 1/3 of the population of his district or whatever, but he's pretty safe. So it's going to be funny to watch all these people pissing up a rope and getting it all over their own hands and whatever. But like to know more about who they are and what they're doing here.
I think they've been stupid here, because if you look at, and I think there's a reason they've been stupid. The three main actors here are Miriam Adelson, John Paulson, and Paul Singer. These are all people who either made money on Wall Street or in, the casino world. So, this is a Palm Beach, Wall Street, Las Vegas crowd. Not coincidentally, there are ties in their general networks to old Jewish mafia, which gave rise to a lot of, sort of Zionist. Whitney Webb is very good on this. But these are people who operate at a remove from Kentucky's 4th District.
Sure.
These are people who, and I say this in the
Well, and when you say mafia, can you say who you mean by that?
Yeah, I'd actually rather refer listeners and watchers to Whitney Webb's One Nation Under Blackmail, because she does it much better. I make certain references in my piece, but I don't want to misstate. A lot of these go back to Meyer Lansky in the, 1950s. Two of the major people I can talk about in a minute, Michael Steinhardt and Charles Bronfman, who in many ways sort of seeded the ground for what we're seeing with Paulson, Adelson, and Singer, had connections to these networks. So basically what you have is a sort of a Jewish version of The Godfather, but rather than sort of getting respectable and acting as a stabilizing influence in the communities, which is what the Italian mafia did, the sort of children of some of these figures, Steinhardt's father was majorly connected to Meyer Lansky. And Steinhardt says that he's in the networks. And what you have instead is these figures moving into the military corporate complex, using their background, using their money to then move into that complex via Wall Street and then Washington. And that's where a lot of this starts, from a sort of earlier generation in the 80s and 90s, people who knew William Casey at the CIA. People who were very connected to, if the government wanted foreign payoffs, they could rely on this particular small network of, increasingly Zionist financiers who knew how organized crime works. By this point, and this is sort of a key part of the story I tell, they've gotten quote unquote respectable, which is to say, John Paulson has his name on, who's one of the main three backers against Massie. Just to remind everybody, it's John Paulson, Miriam Adelson, and Paul Singer. These are the main three, and then they operate in this broader network that I talk about in the piece, where people like Charles Bronfman and Michael Steinhardt, who are a little older, sort of seeded a lot of the ground for what they're doing. But these people in the 90s and 2000s have gotten respectable. And they've gotten respectable by donating to respectable institutions. John Paulson has his name on two buildings, one at NYU, one at Harvard. The Harvard one is engineering. Michael Steinhardt has his name on a building at NYU. Paul Singer donates to Harvard. Bernie Marcus, the late Bernard Marcus of Home Depot, who's one of the major donors to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which I talk about in the piece, is a major sort of funneling channel for people like Singer to funnel money into Republican politics, to twist it the way they wanted. Bernard Marcus donated money he's one of the top 5 donors to George Washington University, but he also donated money for the first master's program in Israel studies to be offered in the United States, which is offered at GW. But a lot of these donations aren't focused on, MIT is another very big center of donations. A lot of these donations aren't focused on Israel. A lot of them are focused on engineering or cancer research. And there is a reason for this, because if you look at, it's really hard to look at a guy like John Paulson and go, oh yeah, that asshole, he donates to engineers so that we can have smarter people in our society. He's an enemy. Well, look, that's specific, right? There's a reason that's done. I don't know what these people tell themselves in their heads. I have some idea. They may say it's for the greater good, but the function of that kind of philanthropy is to say, well, yes, they may be attacking this guy in the 4th district, but they've done so much good for society. Look at the Singer Fellowship. Look at his donations to the Museum of the Bible. Look at John Paulson.
It's just Rockefeller passing out silver dimes, right? It's just public relations.
It's as if, Rockefeller in his late old age would pass out money to kids. It's like these guys have fast forwarded it because they see a political use to it. At least that's what I think.
But it might as well be Ivy Lee having them do it for the PR, right? That's what it's all about, is the image.
I can't say that 100%. I think so. I know that's the function. I think one of their justifications is they see themselves as giving back to society, but they're giving back to perpetuate their own power in a society that they're trying to remake, to, focus on their priorities. So it's self-interested from beginning to end. Here's where I think is interesting about Thomas Massie, because not only do these programs at MIT and Harvard and NYU and Cornell and Columbia that are funded by many of these players, not only do they function to give them respectability, they also function to bring people in. If you're a smart person, with a high IQ, smart, all kinds of smart, but if you have a high IQ and you go to NYU and you go to the Steinhardt School, you're going to feel, well, I went to the Steinhardt School. The same thing if you benefit from John Paulson's largesse at Harvard, right, as an engineer. The point of these is to bring people into the power structure. That's one of their points. It's to say, well, I benefited from this, therefore I am loyal to this system and the priorities of the people who are funding me. It doesn't matter where they got their money, doesn't matter what their geopolitics are, they've helped me along. Thomas Massie, in many ways, was a prototype for this, right? He went to MIT. He and his wife who also went to MIT, started their own company. They lived in Massachusetts. And I mentioned this at the start of the piece briefly. 5 years in his mid-30s, they go back to their homeland of Appalachia, to the 4th district, one of the more lower income areas in the nation. live off the grid, build their own house, powered with all these patents because Massey's brilliant that he invents. Massie dealt his way out of the system and then enters the system again and says, look, I'm not going to represent you people. I mean, I don't care that you've given a building, John Paulson. I'm going to represent the people I come from. I mean, that's Massey's deal. As you said, he started at the town council level, right? If Denzel Washington, as I mentioned earlier, is the prototype for a lot of these bad Saudi, Israeli, Zionist operators, Emirati operators in D.C., Kevin Kline's Dave from the 1993 movie, if anybody's ever seen it, he's the guy who helps people in his hometown and then runs for president, right? Like that's the Massey model. And then I don't actually think it's at all romantic to say that. I mean, as somebody who was part of some of these networks and then left them, I think it does take real loyalty to where you're from and your roots and your original values. And so now you have this situation where these sort of big philanthropists have decided we're going to train our money in the person of Chris LaCivita, who, if you look at Chris LaCivita, this is the kind of guy who goes bison hunting in Texas and then pays for the bison to be FedExed so it can be served to him in Virginia. Like, this is a fake. This is a faux frontier guy, right? Like, this is not a real person. He is Paulson's, Singer's, and Adelson's put-up guy for this attack that they're making. And this is why I think it's a mistake, because it's not like Massey is on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. It's not like he's a cabinet member. This man represents his district. And they have decided these people who are not from the district, who are, very much invested. I don't happen to. I'm Jewish. I don't happen to think they're invested in Judaism. I happen to think they're invested in power. They're not even invested. They're invested in a powerful country, Israel. These people are training their sites with massive amounts of money on this congressman. And so in many ways, I think it's a very clear story. These networks have operated quietly. They've operated through respectability or through, quiet, sort of under-the-table financial plays. When they start to make moves like this, I think it becomes much more obvious who they are. And I think it's a clear case of hero and villain. Because on one hand, you have Thomas Massie. On the other hand, you have, and, now I can just do a quick pyramid because I've mentioned some of these names, just making it clear where they come from. On the other hand, you have a group of people who start basically with Michael Steinhardt and Charles Bronfman in the 1990s. Wealthy financiers with criminal connections in their family's past, or likely criminal connections in their family's past, who get together and start thinking in the 90s, we want to fund things that perpetuate American Zionists and Israel. It's a particular, and you can read, Jewish Currents, which is left-wing and anti-Zionist and quite critical of these guys. Jewish writers have said, look, they don't want Jewish continuity. They want the right kind of Jewish continuity. They want Zionists. They want Israel. Steinhardt and Bronfman start this with basically three foundations or three approaches in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And I talk about this in the piece, which is short, by the way. The first one is birthright, which gives any American Jew 18 to 26 the opportunity to go free of charge to Israel. Birthright, when I came up, was always presented as this incredibly sort of beneficent gesture. That's not the way the Israelis see it. You can read an article by Israel's consul general to New York, the ex-consul general, who calls birthright, that factor, the tablet factor, the most important emotional agent Israel possesses in America. This is meant very clearly to get American Jews loyal to Israel.
And by the way, can I ask you real quick? From here, I'm very ignorant, but it just seems like from what I've heard of it, it's portrayed to young American Jews that this is inevitable. This is what every young American Jew does, even though that's really not true, right? But it's more than just an option. It's something that's expected of young Jews, or not?
I think that's true. I grew up in a small city in the Midwest, there are people who know more about this who, I mean, there's a one I will recommend for your readers, if it's all right. Jewish Currents has a piece on sexual harassment and birthright I think it came out in 2018.
That's Peter Beinart's magazine, right? Or he's...
Yeah, right. Yes. Beinart writes for them.
Okay.
They have they have sort of a really good description of what that's like and what it's like for young Jews and the expectations. That's less of my focus.
I gotcha. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt on that point.
No, I don't think so at all.
Because it's sort of the question of like, how quickly an operation, because the way you describe it, it's like this narrow thing. It's this brainchild of these few people to make this deep political influence. But then, so it's kind of fascinating then how quickly that can be spun into the kind of thing where, sure, you go to synagogue and you wear your hat and you go on birthright. And that's all part of overnight is just part of being an American Jew. That's part of the experience is you do this field trip to Israel. And they made it seem so normal and so expected that you wouldn't have thought it was a public relations exercise at all, right? You'd have just thought that it was part of everyone's tradition all of a sudden or something like that.
I think they worked very hard to bury any option. I mean, the Sulzbergers at the New York Times, they've always been iffy on Zionism. They were against Zionism in 1945, right? Most American Jews were not Zionists until 1945. Zionism didn't justify itself the way it does now, which is often off the horror in Europe in the 1940s, until after that horror. I mean, they want to erase all of that history. They want to say, as it was in the beginning, which is the way we say it is, as it will be in the end, as it will always be. They want to cut off historical options. And as you say, make this inevitable. The way they've been able to do that is not, again, Jewish. It's largely the fault of big government and big corporations and philanthropy as it developed everywhere in America in the 1980s. Philanthropy became this weapon. And more people, more and more government. I mean, I'll do Murray Rothbard here just because he's so wonderful about the book you recommended to me, where he talks about the way that capital twists itself around the state and then manipulates, in an anti-free market, anti-egalitarian, anti-representative direction. That's what capital did in the 70s and 80s and 90s. People like Steinhardt, Brofman, others, they wanted to steer favorable tax policy, favorable incentives to philanthropic foundations because they knew that would make them, or at least I think they knew, what do I know? They knew that would make them look beneficent and it would be a way to push their project fast. I mean, the reason this got done so fast is the money involved. And you can read, I'll only throw out one more name, Lila Corwin Berman, who writes about it. And she has a whole book, The American Jewish Philanthropic Complex, where she basically says Zionists took over the Jewish philanthropic complex in the 1980s and 1990s, and they've twisted it into this really weird thing. And that's because they had a lot of money to do it. And if you look at it, their first major prong was birthright. Their second major prong was, it was originally the Hebrew word for truth. It was a think tank and a propaganda arm to justify Israel's policies vis-a-vis Palestinians in the 2000s, in 2001. But it soon became the much more sort of banal-sounding Foundation for Defense of Democracy. That was also Steinhardt funded, Singer funds it, the Adelsons fund it, that was sort of the Washington political muscle. That was the second thing they invested in. And then the third thing was the New Republic, which Steinhardt became a part owner of in 2002. And it was this, it was at the time the most influential political magazine in America. It was read by everybody in Washington. And
let me ask you, the New Republic had been founded by like J.P. Morgan, Woodrow Wilsonites. back in, the days before World War I. So you must know more about this than me. Was this the first time that Zionists really took it over from the former WASP establishment? Was when Peretz and his gang that you're describing here got a hold of it? Or was it prior to that? I mean, not that the WASPs were anti-Zionist, but they weren't Zionist Jews the way we're talking about neoconservatives here.
1974 was when Peretz brought it, was the year.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that is way back. Okay.
And
That's 50 years ago now. Yeah.
Well, let me be clear about this since you've asked. The original owners were the straight Whitney family, and these were WASPs, and some of them were sort of belligerent colonialists. Others of them, I mean, Michael Straight, who sold it to Peretz, was a communist. I mean, for a while at least. He was, now whatever you think of communism, the guy was anti-empire. I mean, he was vociferously anti-American empire. So they owned the magazine from 1914 to 1974, and he was the major player there in the second part.
Now the Whitneys, they were like a skull and bones family going back to the founding of the country, right?
Yeah, they were. These were, by the 60s and 70s, these were not belligerent operators. These were not pro-colonial operators. They weren't shake your fist at the establishment, but they were anti-war in a very respectable kind of way. So yeah, I mean, when Peretz took this over in 74, it was a major shift. But I mean, even in the 80s, we were still in the Cold War. So I mean, Zionism was important newly because Reagan thought we needed the Zionists after the fall of Iran. But Zionism wasn't a hinge of American policy. That had to wait until the 90s and 2000s. And it really was with these groups, Birthright, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the New Republic, in its later years, that pushed it that way. I mean, you really had to wait because, I mean, the Cold War, our focus was on the USSR. I don't think it's a coincidence that in the 90s and 2000s, we entered a new war, the war on terror. And if you look at some of the cartoons that sort of militarist Republicans are putting out about Zoran Mamdani right now, they have, I mean, it's literally, Andy Ogles put this, I was stunned. He said, "Go back home, little Muhammad. Take your commie ideas with you," or something like that. And there's a picture of Mamdani, as a Muslim, holding the hammer and sickle. And to me, that was the perfect synthesis of what was going on, which is after the Cold War, the military corporate complex needed more funding. It needed to keep its shareholders happy. And here you have these Zionists who come on and say, look, we've got a target. And we have interest groups. We have Birthright. We have New
That's
Republic.
so funny because I was just going to say, man, I kind of agree with that. But then that's the point, right? Is the Zionists always rushing to get out ahead of anybody? Whatever it is that you're about, they claim to be about that too. Like, for example, the neoconservative W. Bush years. Oh, you're sick of that? You're moving right? You're more of a nationalist now? Hey, we're nationalists too. We're just like you. And so who's leading the Trump parade from the beginning of 16? It's a bunch of Zionists. They were one of the only major factions that supported him. Yeah, Bill Kristol was against him, but his brother-in-law, Elliot Abrams, worked for the guy. And, a whole bunch of Zionists supported him then. So
I actually think that's an amazing example because now that Trump is in, Abrams has a position. Had Harris gotten in, Kristol would have had not a position, but a line. Their loyalty, and I say this at the start of the piece, they look politically promiscuous because they'll back Republicans or Democrats, but it's evidence of an underlying fidelity, which is to the military corporate center and anybody to it. So Kamala Harris or Liz Cheney. Or now, unfortunately, Donald Trump. I mean, what you've seen is via these foundations that Steinhardt Bronfman started, and then Singer, the Adelsons, and Paulson took over in the 2000s and 2010s. And the fourth I'll add, Birthright, the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, the New Republic, and then the Manhattan Institute, which Singer is now funneling money in to push Republican priorities towards three things. Free markets, which does not mean free markets, it means financial giveaways. It's George W. Bush all over again. Culture wars. You got to be against communism, pro-Christianity, pro-Zionist, and Israel. Those are what they want to make the Republican base care about. And as you say, they are very, very effective because they'll take things that, look, a lot of people on the right, everybody on the right doesn't like communists. But are communists the biggest threat to America? I think they're definitely not. I think the whole thing's crazy. I think the military corporate complex is the greatest threat to America. What they do is they say, hey, look, we got to fight the commies. And they do the same thing with Muslims. I mean, have there been terror attacks carried out by Muslims? Yes. Is that the biggest threat America faces? I think it's crazy to say so. But these networks, the Manhattan Institute, FTD Foundation, they're funneled by these billionaires. They're saying, if you criticize the military corporate complex, Thomas Massie, you are throwing open our borders, not just to illegal immigrants, but to Islamic terrorists and communists. And that's, at the moment, it seems like an incredibly effective method for shutting down critiques and resistance to what I think, and I think, who am I to say, but I think the founders would have said this too. They revolted. They didn't revolt against communism or Islamism. They revolted against a military corporate empire. I think they would say this is the major threat we face today. Yeah. Money and wars.
Hey, y'all, I've been working on the audiobook of my new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. I've now finished and posted part 3 of the audiobook to my Substack and Patreon at scotthortonshow.com and patreon.com/scotthortonshow. So that finishes all of George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. I know there's still a long way to go, but just these first 2 chapters are almost 10 hours of audio to get you started. I promise I'm doing the rest as fast as I can. Get the audiobook of Provoked first. Subscribe at scotthortonshow.com or patreon.com/scotthortonshow. Hey y'all, here's how you can support those who support this show and stay awake while you're doing things. Moondo's Artisan Coffees, moondosartisancoffees.com. Get it? Starbucks supports the war party. Moondo's is with us. And it's really good. Get the Scott Horton Show blend. Just click the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org.
Hey guys, I had some wasps in my house, so I shot them to death with my trusty Bug Assault 3.0 model with the improved salt reservoir and bar safety. I don't have a deal with them, but the show does earn a kickback every time you get a Bug Assault or anything else you buy from Amazon.com by way of the link in the right-hand margin on the front page at scotthorton.org. So keep that in mind. And don't worry about the mess. Your wife will clean it up. Well, folks, sad to say, they lied us into war. All of them. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq War I, Serbia, Afghanistan, Iraq War II, Libya, Syria, Yemen. All of them. But now you can get the ebook, All the War Lies, by me for free. Just sign up for the email list at the bottom of the page at scotthorton.org or go to scotthorton.org/subscribe. Get All the War Lies by me for free. And then you'll never have to believe them again.
Well, the thing is, it really, Matt, comes down to just how clumsy they are with their accusations, how obvious it is that they're lying, how flat their punchlines fall, or whether, it works. I mean, I think the most obvious example of what we're talking about that's been so effective is the creation of Ben Shapiro and his foisting on the American right as somehow the leader of conservatism, where, I mean, whatever, this is my point of view, but also I'm right about everything, that his whole point always is, if you agree with me about this, you got to support Israel. And then he says every other right-wing thing that all other right-wingers say about everything. And then he says, and you got to support Israel at the end, whether it's guns or property rights or markets. Let me tell you something, guys. You need prices. Prices are things. What are you, a communist? What are you, stupid or something? By the way, we got to support Israel. And like, no, young lady, you're not really a boy. No, young man, you're not really a girl. Support Israel. And then everybody goes, yeah, man, you know who's really good on that trans men are not really women thing are those Zionists. They're really great on that stuff. And people just line up behind it. But it makes me very curious because when I listen to the guy, he's just so uninspiring and has always been that way. He started writing and became a big deal back in the W. Bush years when his whole reason for being was supporting the war in Iraq and all of that. But I just think he's so unimpressive every time I ever listen to him say everything. And then, so I wonder, well, who bankrolled the Daily Wire? Like, where's the market demand for this? Something tells me it's the donors more than the consumers, that this was the kind of thing that was like a startup business that had a whole hell of a lot of capital behind it and a real reason.
There's a link in the piece. It's a Christian Zionist Texan. I'm forgetting the name. I mean, they were one of his biggest bankrollers. It's a Christian Zionist Texan family. You know, if you look at Barry Weiss, who's sort of like the intellectual Ben Shapiro, you know, with the free press, these are, you know, Howard Schultz and major Silicon Valley Zionists and their allies. I mean, and the amount, I mean, I've heard this just on the grapevine, the amount she pays for like 800 words is insane.
I just heard, didn't she just sell the free press for $250 million when it couldn't possibly be worth?
And what they're saying is that she's tied into CBS now, that because of her connections in New York among certain players there, Zionists and otherwise, she's tied into,
this is crazy,
advising on their coverage. And so this is absolutely, nobody's impressive here. There's just a lot of capital.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, that is one thing about it, right? It's just like with anything, the BS just can't stand the test of time, really. So like, even if you were really excited about Bari Weiss for a minute because she said some things that you liked or something, like, that's going to wear off pretty quick when you can tell that like anything decent about her where she's pretending to be a champion of free speech or something like that, like, she ain't that sincere, and you can definitely find better champions of free speech out there. You don't need her for that. And she comes with all this other baggage about how like your son ought to die for Israel and all of this stuff that just nobody believes in anymore. And it's, you know,
I think that's an amazing, you are right about everything. No, I mean, I think that's an amazing actually summary of a really sensible way to think about it. I mean, other people can talk about this stuff. Why are you going to her?
Yeah. The First Amendment, we all believe in that except like horrible people. But, and most of us can even explain too, like why it's a natural right and why it's a protected right and why it makes sense in a free society to have a system where you can say what you want about things and all of the different things. And we don't need Bari Weiss from the Likud party to come and defend our First Amendment for us, please. And it's obviously, again, just like with Ben Shapiro, it's such a front. The whole thing, I don't know if you ever saw this, man, this great documentary about the Israel lobby that Al Jazeera did. Where it's part of it is about the UK. It's just called the Israel Lobby. It's by Al Jazeera. I recommend this to everyone listening so highly. The first part is about the UK. And the second part is about the US. And in both cases, I forget if it was the same guy or not. I think it was different guys. In both cases, they sent liberal Jews as undercover investigative journalists deep into the heart of the Israel Lobby. And they got like really great information and really exposed a lot about them. But the one thing that always really sticks with me about that, just because it's catchy and funny and like in my memory, it's bright colors, is Kittens and Donuts. It was this huge Facebook page called Kittens and Donuts, which had however many hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever followers it was. And it was all just clickbait for housewives that look at this cute little kitten and look at this pretty donut and look at this kitten trying to figure out how to eat this donut and whatever. And isn't it cute? And they would just, whatever, that was their deal. And then like every 6 weeks or so, they would put out Stand with Israel. And then, so like if you're sophisticated at all, you realize that this was never about the donuts, dude. This was always about Stand with Israel. And this is like as close as they can get to like, remember the old mythical subliminal messages in the movie screens, go buy a Coke or whatever. This is as close as they can get to that, is making housewives feel that like, all the other housewives who also like kittens also like Israel. But it's just the thing of it is, though, that like, boy, that can be pretty transparent. And once it's very transparent, then it seems very cynical and exploitative. And then you might like have cause to resent it. You know what I mean? I'll buy a Coke on my own. I don't need you to subliminally message me and manipulate me and force me to buy your stupid soda. No, I don't want one. You know what I mean? Same kind of thing here. We're like, if Israel's so great, how come you got to try to manipulate my mom into liking them instead of just making your case?
You should. You should take this on the road. I'm serious. Because really.
This is the show, man.
Trace out the network. I can trace out the networks, but the bottom line bullshit is something I haven't heard it captured this well before. I mean, just on the level of, this isn't practical. This doesn't make sense on the level of how people experience this and how it's working in their daily lives. But I haven't heard that kind of description. I think everybody should hear that.
Yeah. So that to me, that's Ben Shapiro and that's Bari Weiss. They are kittens and donuts. That's what they are. They're here to tell you what you want to hear about XYZ all day long and then support Israel. All people who agree with us about this sensible stuff we just said we're all Zionists around here, aren't you too? Don't you want to be a pepper too? And that's what it's all about. It's just trying to like smuggle Zionism in with the rest of this stuff. And in a way, I don't know, someone objected to my analysis of this one time and saying, come on, Zionism's always been part of the right. But my thing is, no, it hasn't. And also, there's no reason why it should be other than you just say so. No one can ever articulate what we get out of our relationship with them other than spent dollars and dead soldiers and dead civilians and revenge terrorist attacks against our people on their behalf.
I saw somebody post about Lindsey Graham the other day, and he says, if we don't defend Israel, we're going to hell. The Bible will damn us. And I said, because it just hit me suddenly, like, how have you managed to misconstrue a state that was founded with Western military, financial, illegal support by primarily socialist Jews? These were atheists, for fuck's sake. How have you managed to misconstrue this as a product of Christianity? It wasn't. Like, the 1980s were when this happened, and it happened for geopolitical reasons. Yeah. We'd fucked up in Iran. We needed Israel, or we thought we needed Israel. But that's when this happened. Yeah. It didn't. Conservatives, to say just as Zionism is not the only strain in Judaism, and in fact, I think it's a foreign strain, so Zionism is, I think, a foreign strain in conservatism in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brought by money, power, by these networks.
Yep, absolutely. Just look at the way the neocon influence in the media where you still do have just the editorial page of all three major papers. Before you had the Weekly Standard, but now you still have the Washington Examiner and whatever else to replace it. And of course, the National Review is still run by, I don't know if anybody reads them anymore, but they used to matter a lot. Anyway, let's talk all about the Foundation for Defense and Democracies, mainly because I'm embarrassed. When I knew I was debating Mark Dubowitz on the Lex Friedman show, I really should have read everything that Jim Loeb ever wrote about the FDD. And him and all of his guys have done such great work over the years about all that stuff. And I guess I had forgotten about their blood feud, Loeb and Dubowitz. It's so funny. Listen, Mark Dubowitz, this got cut out of the original debate there, but Dubowitz is sitting here trying to convince me that Jim Loeb is an anti-Semite. And I'm like, well, first of all, the guy's really Jewish, so that would seem to preclude it. But also, he's such a sweet little old guy. Jim Loeb, are you kidding me? He hates anyone. Like, give me a break, dude. He's, it's not in his constitution to be mean ever, right? He sticks it to old Dubowitz, but that's in self-defense and on the part of the rest of us too, dude. That's not aggression. It's just that Dubowitz is evil and deserves it. So he also tried to argue that J.J. Goldberg from the Jewish Daily Forward is also a vicious anti-Semite, because usually dudes named Goldberg from the Jewish Daily Forward are vicious anti-Semites. But that's what Mark Dubowitz says. But the thing is I did bite him and I did debunk all the things he said, but I was not really prepared to fully character assassinate the guy as bad as I wish I did. And all that got deleted out of the whole last part of the debate got deleted anyway. But we did have a big fight over the FDD and how Cliff May and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies played such a huge role in, not just pushing us into Iraq, but like into Iraq, but also ideological enforcement on the right and, kind of internal war against anybody on the right who dissented against the war at that time. They're a huge player. And Dubowitz claimed to me, I don't know if this made the cut or not, but he claimed to me, they're like, well, I was against the Iraq war. That was Cliff's thing. I was always an Iran hawk. Like Cliff May is Netanyahu and Dubowitz is Sharon. And this is a big part of his argument that Sharon didn't even support the war in Iraq at all, which is totally a lie. His government got on board, even though, yes, he would have preferred we went to Iran first. But he absolutely supported the war and helped lie us into war, manufactured fake intelligence in English to stovepipe up into the chain to help lie us into the damn thing. So don't give me that. But anyway, man, you have such a deep take on the FDD and their background and all the money and their agenda and just how much influence they have. And it's so funny that I don't know why this is. I really have to fix this. Whenever I rattle off all the neocon think tanks of that era, WINEP and GINSA and PNAC and CSP and whatever, I always leave out the FDD. Like somehow in my head, they're just a different clump of neurons. They're like a different category of think tank for no good reason that I could explain. I just somehow accidentally have them in a different category or something in my head. And I got to figure that out because they're such an important part of it all.
I have to think about that because I'm going through now in my head why that might be. And one reason for me, until I looked into this, I hadn't recognized the depth of their involvement, particularly in the 2010s with Iran. I knew they were involved, but I think it's funded by a kind of odd group of people. It's Steinhardt, who started it, was the biggest backer to the Democratic Leadership Council, which put Bill Clinton in the White House.
By the way, was Cliff May ever a leftist, or he's not actually a neocon, right?
I don't think so.
Right. He's just very close. He's like maybe comparable to Bolton in that way, just very close to the neocons, but not an actual card-carrying member.
And I'm going to get them mixed up. I think it's May. I think May was a Republican Party guy. I think he was from 97 to 2001, the head of the Jewish Republican Committee, if that's the name for it. Maybe it was No, I don't think it was Dubowitz. I think it was May. My take on this, and I am not an FDD expert. I knew somebody there who was sort of an odd person, but I'm not an expert on it. My take is that it was garden variety Republicans married to financial Zionists via sort of interconnected people like May and Dubowitz. I think it was May who was, he was definitely at the RNC, and I know his focus was Jewish or Zionism, and then he went on to do this thing. As you said, it's kind of stunning how sort of obvious some of what they've done is. And I think they've gotten away with it, these connected Zionists, because people weren't paying attention. The FDD was literally founded first under the word in Hebrew that means truth. And then they changed it. So, this was a recognizably Zionist project by Bronfman and Steinhardt and others, straight out of Birthright.
Mm-hmm.
They then changed it to Foundation for Defense of Democracies and brought in, Republican honchos.
Although, in their founding corporate charter, I think someone just published this recently, right? That their corporate charter says their purpose is to explain Israel to, public relations on behalf of Israel, like right there in there.
They think it's enough. They think it's enough to change the name.
Yeah.
These are people who, much like sort of the 1980s and 1990s Democratic Party, which they had a great hand in creating. Steinhardt, the New Republic, others, these were Clinton's big backers. And of course, Clinton was the most friendly Democratic president to Israel. Both before and I suppose until Biden. And I don't think that's a coincidence. These they put a great deal of focus on focus groups, on media blitzes, I mean, a lot of the stuff that people hate about centrist Democrats, besides their policies, are they don't have any respect for voters. They think that if you put a new name on it, everything's okay. And that's nuts, right? I mean, that's infantilizing, it's anti-democratic, it's liberty. But that's what they do. And I mean, I think the FDD is a perfect example because, as you say, if you scratch it just under the surface, it's like, oh, yeah, this is clearly a pro-Israel deal. But, they've changed the name. They've got a Republican guy in there to run it, so it's supposed to have sort of like an idea of universality to it. And, then they have, what you described, the Dubowitz-May sort of hand off the hot potato. I was for Iran, he was for Iraq. Well, either way, I mean, you are, whichever you wanted to do first, you're advancing. I mean, that's trees for the forest kind of bullshit. You're advancing an interventionist foreign policy prescription in the Middle East. So yeah, you can just as you can sort of call it Foundation for Defense of Democracies and say, oh, we're not about Israel. And, you can also say, oh, well, I was for Iraq, but not Iran, and he was for Iran, but not Iraq. So we're not about regime change in the Middle East for Israel's better. I mean, it's not true. I mean, it's patently not true if you look at the networks that fund them and the networks they're connected to and the policies that they're for and against.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm for it. And I think there's things are just becoming so crystallized now. People are turning off the TV more and more. They're listening to longer form investigations, and their scope of the kind of questions and ideas that are allowed to be questioned and discussed or whatever is widening. And people are realizing, they're like, oh yeah, you don't have to pretend to believe in this crap anymore, and things that, like in the days of Iraq War II, it was pretty specialized knowledge who the neocons were and why they were so close to Likud and what they, why they, had this interest in going to war with Iraq and all this complicated clean break stuff. Whereas now all of this is just as blatant as it could possibly be. The cruelty of the campaign against the people of Gaza is just right in everybody's face. All the lies they tell about everything, the way that they think. The widow of a Chinese gambling tycoon thinks that she can just target and destroy a congressman from Kentucky where she's never been in her life. Like, at some point, it becomes just so clumsy and ham-handed and screwed up that it's simply going to backfire in their face. It is already, I think, in a Wile E. Coyote sense. You know what I mean? It's just, it makes them look worse and worse all the time. And they don't know anything else except to scream anti-Semite louder, right? Try to crack down against dissenters more. But all that is just, it's a fool's errand at this point, right? These are the last of the dead enders of the Zionist movement in America now. I was so bold. I hope this is really true. I said Donald Trump might be the most Zionist president in American history, but he might be the last one. People are really getting sick and tired of this. And really, he's helping seal the deal. That boy, why are we doing all these things against our interests and against what we want to do? Oh, Israel somehow is making our president do what they want, right? Like anybody at any kitchen table in America could tell you that's what's happening right now. There's just no way to deny it.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think my view is that thanks in large part to people like you, and you specifically, these names are becoming known. The networks are becoming known. In the revolutionary period, everybody knew who Thomas Hutchinson was and, Andrew Oliver and, the British agents in America. People should know that now too about Zionist agents. They should know who those people are. I also think younger Jews really don't want any part of this. They hate the philanthropic complex. They feel Zionism, many of them, was foisted upon them. They don't think it represents their religion. It doesn't. I think it has nothing to do with Judaism. But, I think that's happening. The one the one flag I'd raise, and this is based on, for whatever it's worth, based on experience, but also what I've seen the last couple of years, these people have a lot of money and they have a lot of connections and they are tenacious about what they believe. I mean, when you look at, Ben Shapiro, I think, is pretty much a fool. I think Barry Weiss is a fairly clever operator. I mean, she made her bones at Tablet magazine, which just had, a redo where it's now publishing a magazine. There's Brett Stevens at Sapper. I mean, there is a younger generation of Zionists who are very committed, who take pride in their minority status and who are ready to take this over. So I think public opinion has shifted. I think the levers of power are very much in these people's hands.
Right.
Because then I don't want to act like this is, it's some Zionist whatever. The military corporate complex wants an excuse to make war. Here are people who are well-connected giving them the excuse. At this point, we have two Congress people, Marjorie Taylor Greene and even more so, Thomas Massie, standing against it. I mean, that's pretty much all. We have Zoran Mamdani, sort of. But that right now there's a major disjuncture in the cultural, social, and public opinion aspect of things, which is how revolutionary movements start always. But when it comes to the politics, it's yet to make the kind of dent that I think it needs to. And they do have people waiting in the wings.
Yeah. But no, that's exactly it, right? It's this contrast where more and more, certainly on the Democratic side, but also more and more on the Republican side, where the contrast between the donors and the owners of the party and the think tanks and the ruling elite and the voters is just so great that it's undeniable that people, they start out confused and then they turn angry. Why is it we can't have our way? Because these very few people who aren't even from here and don't even care about us at all insist that it's so. You know what I mean? Like, if you have consensus on the right for of course, whatever Israel wants, fine. If you don't anymore, but still the leaders demand it, then people are going to get pissed off real quick. Like, actually, we quit believing in that already. You know what I mean? Like, no, we're not doing that anymore. People really get pissed off and dig their heels in over stuff like that. And already it's 50-50 on the Republican side with a Republican president leading the charge. So how do you like that? And, if it was Kamala Harris leading the war in Gaza right now, the opposite, well, I don't know, because Republicans might demand more. But still, again, that's the leaders. I think the dissent would be even harsher against what Israel's doing and what the Democrats are helping Israel do. But with Donald Trump in there saying it's all okay, and 50% favor the Palestinians over the Israelis right now on the right, not the left at all. On the right half of America, half don't want this anymore. And that's, to me, just huge, dude. That is an earthquake, just absolutely massive. And there's going to be hell to pay one way or the other. I'm not saying that the non-interventionists are going to get their way soon, but I'm saying they're going to be really pissed when they don't. And there's going to be, more of a reckoning, a worse reckoning down the line,
Oh, I think this is a movement. And I think you're, for whatever it's worth, you don't need to hear this, but you're one of the founders of this. And for those of people like me who came to this later, in the last couple of years, the amount of not just gratitude, but leadership that I look to you for, because you've made your bones in these fights. You've spent time in these fights. You've compiled encyclopedic works on endless wars. You're creating the framework and the structure for those of us who are coming, where we can do this together. But I'm not only hugely grateful, but I look to you all the time. What's Scott doing? What's the next move here, right? Because you've been at this and you've been in the fight. Yeah. And for those of us who have something to contribute because of our experiences and because of what we've learned, it's both vital and encouraging that there's somebody like you and maybe a couple of others to look to. So,
well, I don't know what the next move is. I wish I did. Well, thank you for all that stuff. You don't need to say that.
That's true, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
thank you.
I appreciate that, and you're welcome and all that. But I don't know what the next move is other than just keep building this consensus, because I think, I'm a Ron Paulian on that education is the key. You get enough people to agree, and then even in the Soviet Union, ultimately the people get what they want, Yeah, dude. So that's what it's all about is, the Libertarian Institute is not dedicated toward educating Washington, although we're very happy to know that there are people in Washington paying attention to what we're saying. But our audience is the people of this country, that we shouldn't take this as from Washington anymore is what we're working towards. That's the consensus we're trying to build. And who could argue with that, right? Like, yeah, we're on to something here. So, and look, I'm really happy to have you on board here. I don't know where the hell Hunter dug you up from, but I'm so grateful to have you on board at the Institute. And you got a really great archive already building here. And it's such a great inside view of these neocon and Zionist networks there on the East Coast. Thankfully, so far from here. But thank you, Matt. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Scott. Really appreciate it.
All right, you guys. That is Matt Wolfson. He is at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. And the latest is who's funding the attacks on Thomas Massie and what networks are backing them.
Thanks for listening to The Scott Horton Show, which can be heard on APS Radio News at scotthorton.org, scotthortonshow.com, and the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org.